Pope Francis is now comparing Vatican whistleblowers to Satan. In a recent Breitbart article, Pope Francis is quoted as saying, "The great accuser, as he himself tells God in the first chapter of the book of Job, roams around the earth looking for someone to accuse." He goes on to say, "It seems that the great accuser has been unleashed and has it in for the bishops." Just let that sink in for a moment. According to the Pope, the real Satanists are the ones who are exposing the rampant sexual abuse that the Catholic Church has been trying so hard to cover up for a long time now. According to the Pope's logic, it is satanic to expose the pedophiles and human traffickers, or to expose the corruption in Washington, D.C. for that matter. If you're part of the movement to expose the corruption and crimes against humanity committed by the elites who rule over you, you are in league with the great accuser. You have joined forces with Satan. If you're part of the Q Army, then you are the real Satanist. This is how twisted the world has become. Of course, Satan means adversary. It's a relative term. From the perspective of a criminal, a police officer is an adversary. From the perspective of the elites who believe it's their divine right to rule over the rest of us as gods, those who oppose their tyranny and who work to spread liberty represent an adversarial or satanic force. My point isn't to say that everything is relative. It's not. I believe in absolute truth, and I'm a moral realist. But the terms themselves are relative. In a war, each side calls the other side the enemy. In a sports match, each team calls the other team their opponents. So I don't really mind being called the opponent by my opponent. And I consider it silly to argue with him and say, "I'm not the opponent, you're the real opponent." Agree with thine adversary quickly. The Pope says that those who are accusing the Catholic Church of covering up widespread pedophilia and sexual abuse are his adversary, or Satan. For me, this is no different. I am the adversary of the evil and corrupt Catholic Church. I absolutely stand with Satan in seeking to destroy this evil institution of false religion. I'm not interested in fighting over words and symbols. I'm interested in reality. I'm interested in opposing evil, darkness, and tyranny. I'm on the side of goodness, light, and liberty. Personally, I actually like inverting the meaning of symbols, though. There's a long history of this in Gnostic Christianity, and I do consider myself to be a Gnostic Christian. I consider the Gnostic Church to be the true Christian church, and I consider the Catholic Church to be the church of the Antichrist, and I consider Judaism to be the synagogue of Satan. Both of these false religions serve the false god of this world, as Satan is called in 2 Corinthians 4:4. And don't forget that in the gospel story, when Satan tempts Jesus, he offers him the world. How could he do this unless the world belongs to him? Satan is the god of this world. No, I don't want to spark a heated religious or theological debate here. I'm just clarifying my own views. I don't demand that everyone else accept them. But because I intentionally invert the meaning of symbols sometimes, it's understandable that some people will misunderstand me. And I actually think that's a good thing. Because in order to understand me, it's necessary to look deeper. It's necessary to look beneath superficial symbols and literal definitions or standard definitions of certain words. and see the underlying reality which words and symbols merely point toward. Imagine that several people are standing in a room in which a candle is lit. If two men are standing on opposite sides of the candle, and they both point towards the candle, which is between them, they will be pointing in opposite directions, and yet they're both pointing toward the candle. If you perceive them as contradicting each other, then you're focused on the fingers instead of what their fingers are pointing to, the candle. If one man turns around and points in the same direction the other is pointing, then he will be pointing away from the candle. And so in the first case, two fingers appear to be pointing in opposite directions, yet they're both pointing to the same thing. And in the second case, two fingers appear to be pointing in the same direction, yet they don't point to the same thing. Words and symbols are like this. They only point. Obviously, if I write the word apple on a piece of paper, or if I draw a picture of an apple, you can't eat it. Well, I guess technically you could, but it wouldn't taste very good. It would taste like paper and ink. If you go to another country where they speak a different language, they call an apple something else. But the apple is the same no matter what you call it. And it's the reality of the apple that matters. As I've matured and become at least a little wiser than I used to be, I've learned to judge a man by his actions and not by his words. Ideally, I would judge a man by his heart, but of course only God can truly know a man's heart. But I believe in the saying that a good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. And I believe in the verse in 1 John that says that love is of God, and everyone that loves is born of God and knows God. And he that loves not doesn't know God, because God is love. I'm paraphrasing, but you can look up the verse for yourself, and I think you'll agree that I've accurately represented what it says. It's 1 John verse 7 and 8, if anyone wants to dust off their Bibles and look it up. Jesus summed up the whole of the law with two commandments: love God, love your fellow man. And interestingly, he says that the second is like the first. For me, that implies that to love your fellow man is to love God, and to love God is to love your fellow man. And so that's what I judge a man by. Two men may call God by a different name, and yet both may, in truth, serve the same God. And yet two men who call the God they worship by the same name may serve two very different gods. I personally consider the God of the Old Testament and the Quran to be Satan. Yet there are Jews and Muslims who unquestionably know God, according to 1 John verse 7 and 8, because they act with love toward their fellow man. There are atheists who know God. That might be hard for some fundamentalist Christians to wrap their heads around, but if you believe the words of the New Testament, you can't deny this. Personally, I reject the Christian religion. But I've known many Christians who I consider to be spiritually awake. I consider the Catholic Church especially to be evil. And it isn't my view that the Catholic Church is evil because it was infiltrated and subverted by the Jews or the Jesuits. I think the Catholic Church was evil from the beginning. But I recognize that there are many good Catholics. In my opinion, Islam is the worst religion of all. But there are good Muslims. It seems to me that those who seek the light will find it, or rather, it will reveal itself to them through any religion. And those who are drawn toward darkness will find it in any religion. And it seems to me that the forces of darkness seek to divide us against one another by causing us to focus on superficial differences, while the forces of light seek to unify us by restoring our sight so that we're able to perceive our shared spiritual essence. In my view, we're not all the same. We're all unique expressions of the One. But we are all unique expressions of the One. And I think that's what I want to end with. I feel like there's a global movement right now, and it includes people of all different races and religions. And I don't think that we have to deny our differences in order to recognize a common enemy and a common purpose. We can each preserve and defend our unique identities, while also recognizing a shared human identity. That's the balance that I'm hoping we can reach. So thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and if you'd like to help support my channel, consider making a donation through PayPal. All of my links are listed below. Again, thanks for listening. Peace.